All right, today's show, we have the one and only Dr. Michael Gerharz. Dr. Michael, he helps leaders across the globe find the right words and makes a bigger impact. Now, who I have today is super special. We value his time. Michael has earned his PhD in communication systems during the mobile phone revolution. He also observed firsthand how brilliant these ideas die when people fail to communicate them properly. Seeing these missed opportunities, he decided to do something about it, launched his blog, and carved a career path dedicated to mastering and teaching the art of communication. He's the author of The Path to Strategic Impact, which launches in October, and The Aha Effect. His blog on the art of communicating has more than 1,000 published posts, and he's the host of the Irresistible Communication Podcast. Without further ado, meet the one and only Dr. Michael Gerharz. Now, Michael, did we hit the nail right on the head or did we miss something, man?
Well, that was an awesome introduction. Thanks, and great to be here.
Absolutely. Glad to have you. For our listeners and audience, man, I'm super excited about today. And the reason I'm excited is because one of my goals in leadership that I have recently come obsessed with is effective communication. So I'm going to spend the next like 20, 30, 40 minutes just selfishly digging into effective communication. And I know you have 5 essentials too. So before we get to those 5 essentials, I want you to tell us a little bit about your backstory, what was your upbringing like, and then what led you into where you are today.
Yeah, well, actually, to be totally honest, as a teenager, I wouldn't have imagined someday landing on that spot that I'm in today. Actually, I think that my biggest dream was to become a professional guitarist. That's what I spent my days with. I spent hours practicing and playing together with friends and just consuming music, playing music. But well, that's not how it turned out. It I went for a college path and studied computer science, and did my PhD on mobile communication. And that's when I grew more and more frustrated with all these great ideas that had been thrown into a trash bin because no one cared for finding better words. I've been to conferences or meetings where brilliant people were speaking about brilliant ideas to other brilliant people, and no one understood a word about what was so exciting about that. And so that just faded into the background, and no one ever got back to that idea. And I always thought that there must be a better way, because I knew that there is a better way because I saw one or two great presenters in my life. And then I started hopping onto the internet and found a couple of blogs presentation. That Zen was one of those in my early days. And then I started my own blog and started to explore different paths. And that's how this thing got started.
Man, that's beautiful. You had mentioned earlier that going through frustration, right? And then being on that journey of trying to solve for a solution for communication and effective communication. And you had mentioned there was 2 leaders that had stuck out to you that, correct me if I'm wrong, that effectively communicated, that made a big impact in your life. Is that correct?
Yeah,
What were
a bunch more, but certainly two who stand out with two very profound lessons. One of them was my guitar teacher, um, who hammered on me a profound lesson on preparation and showing up prepared. And I think that that's one of the most powerful lessons, not only for communication but for entrepreneurs in general. And that lesson was, in order to play fast, you gotta practice slowly, because that's what every teenager who starts playing the guitar wants to do, right? We have those guitar heroes. Back in the days, it was like Joe Satriani, Ingrid Malmsteen, and Steve Vai, and those and the likes. And we just try to play as fast as them. But of course, when we do that too soon, too early, our fingers aren't trained yet to do that, and so we kind of train our fingers to play with inaccuracies, and these
Mm.
inaccuracies turn into muscle memory. And so when we actually play fast, it somehow never sounds fully right. It somehow sounds off. But then to stop and correct those inaccuracies becomes super, super hard because they have turned into muscle memory. You have to really hit the brakes hard and basically restart from zero. Um, and so, although it feels like you're up to a head start when you start with playing fast, you're actually slowing yourself down the road. A much better approach and a much faster path to success is to start it slowly, build the skills as you go, and once you've got the skills, then hit full speed and then move fast, and then you're going to be surprised how much of those who started with playing fast will be left behind very soon.
That's so hard. That's such a challenge and so hard to understand when it comes down to, because we're big on going slow to go fast, but we as human beings, myself included, we want it now, right? It's that impatient. It's,
Yeah.
I want to play the guitar now. I want to be an effective speaker now. I want to be an awesome human being, entrepreneur, business owner now. And it just takes those reps. It takes to really build a solid foundation. Ask yourself the right questions, making sure that you have a guide or a mentor to take you down that path that they've already been down. And so I resonate so much with that. And one of the things, like I told you before we started the episode today, is I'm obsessed with leadership. And there's so many things that come with leadership, right? There's so many variables, there's so many moving parts. And one of the skill sets that I've really wanted to hone in on and dive deep on and master here in the next basically 12 to 18 to 24 months, which is a life journey, is
Mhm.
effective communication. And so for somebody like me, I'm in my 30s, I'm a business owner, I'm an entrepreneur. There's things I've said, Dr. Michael, that I shouldn't have said. It's come out of my mouth. It didn't land with the other individual. For somebody that's a business owner and entrepreneur, they're trying to lead a team of people. They're trying to lead their spouse. They're trying to be a leader in their household or their friends or their community. What is that? What is the top three effective ways to communicate for being a leader and showing up for the employees, for the spouses, for the people around you? What are those top three tips or action steps that myself as a leader, selfishly, can really dive deep on so it lands with people? And I know you had mentioned it earlier. Preparation was key, and I don't want to forget about that because we need to talk about that as well.
Yeah. So since we've already checked that one, let's start with some more. And there's a clear priority here. I have a clear number one here, and that is don't persuade harder, resonate stronger. Um,
Mm,
um, so much advice on communication, and so many books have been written on the art of persuasion. But I was never a big fan of that art because to be honest, who really likes to be persuaded, right? Um, if you need to persuade someone, it usually means that you want them to do something that they originally didn't want to do.
right.
And ultimately, that means that you need to apply some kind of force. Let's call it force, like psychological tricks or some incentives or some kind of force. And that often creates counterforce, a little bit of resistance, defense. Um, when in fact, there's a path that would be much easier for both of us if you just cared to look for it. And that is to look from their perspective. So if I want to achieve X, what is it in that X that my customer, my team, my friend, my partner, my audience wants to. So, where's the common ground here? And how can I resonate with what they want so that it matches both of our interests? And so that means that we should start with listening. not just kind of crafting our message, coming up with fancy slogans or super sales strategies that sound smart, um, just to persuade them to follow our path, to make them agree to our take, but instead try to understand what's their take, find the common ground, and resonate with that. And when we do that, when we resonate deeply with what matters to them, you'll be surprised at how open they are to supporting you, right?
That is so brilliant. That's like a masterclass in itself right there. I, People need to reverse that. They need to rewind that because, and I just made a note here when I hear you say active listening, that's actually one of the skill sets under the leadership that I have struggled with in the past. And I just wanted to get my word out edgewise. And I was the persuader as a leader. And it works to a certain degree, but I resonate with so much with what you're saying is, and they're seeing the energy, the charisma, and they're hearing my words and they're going, okay, but deep down inside, because I'm not meeting them where they're at, because I didn't active listen,
And
there's not a movement.
yeah, and here's a trap actually for good communicators, because when you're skilled at communicating, you know which words to pick in order to achieve that, right? In order
Right.
to get people moving, to agree to your proposal, to admit that you're right.
Yeah.
But that can become a trap if you become attached to that feeling of being right, of getting that approval, of getting the buy-in, because it might keep you from digging deeper, from asking the questions from their side, from really looking for their perspectives. And that's what great communicators do. They transcend that skill of being a good persuader and start resonating because they ask those important questions regardless.
Hmm. It's never too late. If somebody's listening to this, it's not like, hey, you know what? It's too late. And what I'm hearing you say is there's hope, right? Anybody listening to this, myself included, I'm like, I can start today. I can start actively listening to my spouse, to my employees, to my family and friends. And this is one of the skill sets that I've been working on. If somebody struggles with active listening, what would be a trigger or a tip or an actionable advice to be intentional about, oh, this is one of those times I need to be active listening in this moment. And it's like you said with the guitar, right? It's like you're not just going to come out of the gates and start playing Bon Jovi, right? You've got to practice. You've got to put in the reps. You got to fail, make mistakes, trial and error. So is there
Yeah.
any kind of tips on how do I improve my active listening? Or is it just, hey, you just need to be intentional about it, making it a priority, and put in the reps?
Um, I think one great tool to make that happen and to make that a habit in your team is to make asking the question, so what do you mean,
What do you?
the
That's
norm.
good.
That's that in so many teams, that's actually a word that people shy away from, right? Because it could suggest that you've not paid attention, that you're not as smart as the others who all seem to get it, when in fact what the other person or what I myself was saying wasn't clear at all. And that's totally human, right? I mean, no one's perfect with getting it clear all the time. There's that strange phenomenon that's called the curse of knowledge, which means that the more we know about something, the harder it gets to speak about that thing in simple terms. So it's totally normal that if we're good at something, we might use words or metaphors or analogies that are clear to us because we're thinking about those things all the time, but that are not at all clear to the team. who just didn't get it. Or it might just be that we made some misconceptions. And if we would stick to that position of we're right and my goal is to defend my position and argue that I'm right and you are wrong, you're immediately off track. But if you just consider that possibility that someone is allowed to ask you basically at any time, so what do you mean by that? Or how does that translate to this situation? Or how does that affect that customer? If you make those questions the norm and allow it at every time, you're opening the floor to a much better shared understanding of the task at hand.
You're singing to my heart and soul right now. Everything that you just said, where was this 20 years ago in my life? If I would have understood that, to slow down, to ask these simple questions, as simple as what do you mean? Because I know a lot of individuals listening to this, we always want to get our word out edgewise, whether that person wants to hear or not. We're always thinking about what we're going to say versus what they're saying. And active listening is actually putting yourself in their shoes and meeting them where they are and what they're saying. And you can't
Yeah.
do that if you're already thinking about what you're saying. And that's been a challenge and struggle of mine. And I have just realized this in a long decade of business ownership is I've always been the guy that's always been like, this is my words. I'm not listening to a word you said. Well, that got me nowhere, right?
Yeah,
With my
exactly.
spouse, with my business, with the people around me. Sure, I may have persuaded, but like you said earlier in the podcast, is persuasion is they're not bought in, they're not empowered. It's not their choice because you persuaded them. When you
Exactly.
active
Yeah.
listen and you meet that person as a leader where they are in their shoes with what you're saying, and then elaborating, diving deep on what do you mean with what they're saying, that already shows just that one little question that already shows, oh, he's listening to me
Exactly. Yeah.
versus you talk, I talk, you talk, I talk, you talk, right?
Yeah, and leadership has shifted a lot in that regard. I mean, for our grandparents, it was basically that. Well, the we've had that authority model, that command and control, where the leader could basically didn't have to bother about any clarity at all because the team was expected to follow through and make sense of what the leader said. That has shifted at some point where we shifted to that carrot and sticks model and used incentives, and then recently shifted to that leaders go first and eat last and stuff and lead by example. But I think what we're just discussing now is that to transcend even that it's not anymore required for the leader or even expected from the leader to have all the answers, but to
Mm.
be willing to figure out the answers regardless of whose take it is and who's got the right answers, as long as we figure it out together. And I think Scott Kelly, the former ISS commander in chief, has a brilliant take on that, who said that um, the smartest person in the room is the one who knows how to tap into the intelligence of everyone in the room. It's not the one who's got all the answers. That's a model of the past where the
Yes.
leader was expected to have all the answers. And if you didn't know something, you could just go to the leader and he would tell you what's right and what's wrong. But that's a thing of the past. Today, we're trusting our team to be able and willing to figure it out together, and sometimes to just be a lot smarter than us, and that the smartest team is the one that knows how to tap into everyone's brilliance.
Oh my, you are a very smart man. You are brilliant. I don't know if anybody's ever told you that. But when I hear you say this, in my experience, is because I've always been, as a leader and in leadership, and what I've been taught is I have to know all the answers. And as I've went through this journey, I've realized authentically and genuinely, I don't have all the answers in business or in life. I know this much, a grain of sand. And so what I'm hearing you say in the story that you just shared with me is I resonate so much with that, because now here in the last basically 12 months, I've realized, like, I tell my team and everybody, I don't know. That is literally my favorite thing. I don't know. Maybe you can explain it to me. And so I tell them that, and then it empowers them to not, only help solve the solution or issue with me and use our resources, but 9 times out of 10, they're better at it, whatever that department is or
Yeah.
area, than me.
Yeah,
And
and that means that
it's
the
beautiful.
role of leadership has shifted significantly. It's
Yes.
not about knowing the answers anymore. It's about lighting the path, setting those boundaries and those guidelines, and lighting that destination. That this is where we're headed. This is why we're headed there. This is why it's got to be us who's taking on the challenge of moving down that path, and
Mm.
to really get the team aligned on that mission so that everyone stands behind it, and then trust the team
Yes.
with knowing how to walk that path, being able to walk that path, being willing to figure out a path that works best towards that destination, and then trusting them with knowing how to walk it.
Oh, it's beautiful. I wanted to transition into your book that's releasing in October, correct?
Right.
The Path to Strategic Impact. And I'm going to be completely transparent with you. I'm excited about getting this book. As soon as we get off this podcast today, I'm going and order. Where can we order it? Because I'm excited.
um, yeah, you can order it from 1st of October, and it's going to be on Amazon or in your favorite bookstore.
Okay, fantastic. Yeah, Amazon's my place. So I'll be getting it there, and we'll have it in the show notes as well. So in the book, but correct me if I'm wrong, you talk about 5 essentials, correct?
Actually, it's four.
4 essentials.
It's yeah, it's yeah, they are derived from the path, which I use as an acronym for four basic principles that help you communicate your strategy in a way that your team fully embraces, is knows what to do, does the right actions, and does it with conviction, and to take courageous bold moves.
Okay, I want people to get the book, myself included, because you just obviously you from a podcast, you just can't take from a podcast and then go apply it in your life. You got to read the entire book. And I'm a big believer in that, and take those and filter it and apply it in your own life as a leader. But would you mind sharing 1 or 2 of those principles and then maybe diving deep on those?
Absolutely. So probably let's first say what it's about. I mean, what made me write that book is that,
Yeah.
once again, frustration, right? Because I
Yes.
I so often work with those teams that work and that put their heart in their strategy, into their vision, and the vision is bold, the strategy is smart, and we're coming back from that strategy retreat, and everyone's pumped and feels enthusiastic. But
Yep.
then, like 3 weeks in, everyone's back to normal. We've almost forgotten. It's like a faded dream that doesn't really feel real anymore, because, well, the day to day creeped in, the team's not really bought in. Then there's that new trend that pops up on social media that seems relevant, and so all the good intentions have gone wrong. And so the reason that the strategy crumbled wasn't that it wasn't smart or that it wasn't ambitious enough. It was that no one cared for finding the words that gave it the importance that it deserves, and that helped the team embrace it so that everyone knows what it means for their everyday lives, right?
Mm, yes.
And that's why this book exists, because I mean, there's a ton of books. Libraries have been filled with books about what a great strategy looks like, and then there's books and libraries filled with execution, right? Which processes you need to have in place, feedback loops, and stuff like that. But almost no book exists about uh, the bridge between those two. So, how do you communicate your strategy so that your team knows what it means for their everyday, so that you can
Yes.
make the impact that you set out to make? That's why you built that business in the first place.
Yep.
And from my work, I've tried to cross that with a little research on what the strategically most successful companies do differently. And I derived like four principles, which conveniently form the acronym PATH. So the PATH to strategic impact actually stands for four basic principles, and that's plain and simple, actionable, transformative, and heartfelt. So if you manage to find words that are plain and simple, that everyone on your team understands,
Yes.
and that are actionable so that they understand what they mean for their everyday choices that they need to make when a new project is built, is set up, when a customer calls, when a negotiation has to take place, when it's transformative, so that you just don't only play by the rules but are bold enough to make decisive leaps ahead, and age heartfelt so that everyone is passionately embracing that and fully believes in that. When you find words that check those four boxes, your chances of making the impact that you want to make have greatly increased.
Oh my gosh. That rings so true. And when I'm hearing you say and following this strategic approach, one of the things that popped in my mind is Dr. Michael, this is all great, and I want to be a better effective communicator, but it's I am who I am. This is my identity. This is how I show up. This is I'm going to get my word in edgewise. And so one of the things that I think of is when people are familiar and leaders are familiar with what it is that they're already doing, how do you go back to square one, and is this a teachable skill set to go back and learn this effective communication and strategize and get really good at this and then turn the tables of how you show up as a leader? Is this a skill set that's teachable and that anybody can do?
Absolutely. So I'm a full believer in that, and I hope that the book actually teaches you parts of those skills that are relevant for your strategy communication. I think one of the things that are that are essential to making that leap, that to stay in your image, get you back to base one,
Right.
is to understand what I like to call the rule number one in communication, which is brutal, because it goes like this: if they didn't get it, they didn't get it. End of
Yeah.
story.
That's it.
There's really no use in arguing that you've mentioned it on slide 13, bullet point 5, or that you meant it slightly differently. They didn't get that, and that's not their fault. It's yours.
Mm.
If you want them to act in a certain way, they owe you nothing.
Yeah.
It's your responsibility. And the moment you realize that, changes everything. Because that moment is when you take ownership of your communication. When you understand that you cannot delegate the task of figuring out what it all means to your audience, to your teams,
Mm.
that you should take that task on your own and make it your top priority, because that is the skill of the future. Leaders of the future are the ones who know how to tap into the brilliance of their team, and the way to do that is not by command and control or using the carrot and the sticks. It's by using effective communication.
Wow. One of the things that it made me realize is that when you pull back the layers and you face this challenge as a leader and you level up as a leader and you're like, okay, I get it. This is one of the things I need to do to become a better, effective communicator. One of the things that I struggle with, and I'm sure our listeners do as well, is feedback.
Mhm.
So I'm on this path, I'm on this journey, Dr. Michael, of becoming this effective communicator, active listening, applying these principles in these action steps. These are all great, and I'm going to go out and apply those. What would be one piece of advice or a tip on seeking feedback? How do I know that I'm improving? How do I know that I'm being an active listener? How do I know I'm getting results? And I'm selfishly asking this. I'm curious if from your experience that where's the feedback? Because I'm looking at progress. I'm looking at results. And when I talk to an employee, when I talk to my spouse, when I talk to a friend or a family, is there any kind of feedback that I can solicit or a sign that I can watch for to see if this is working?
Totally. I mean, a bunch actually, right? I mean, the most obvious one is the one that everyone shies away from, which is to just plainly ask, right? So,
Yeah.
did you understand what I just said? Could you repeat it in your own words? And then just face the brutal truth that comes back, and see that, well, obviously they no, they didn't get it,
Yeah.
and then don't blame them for it, but take that on you and try to come up with something that's better. Um, and then the second thing that I'm a huge believer in is the blank stare of your friends. So when you speak to your friends or your colleagues, people that are close to you, or even your customers at times, when you see the blank stare on their faces after you've told them about your brilliant new idea that you're so pumped up with, and that you think is the best idea that you ever had, and they just reply with that blank stare. So what are you even talking about here? um,
Yeah.
well, that's a gift, right?
Yeah.
It means that we haven't explained it clearly enough, and if it's our friends, it means that we've got chance to refine it until we meet the first customer that, or the investor that we're trying to get some funding from. Um, and so actually to embrace the fact that no one's perfect and no one ever nails it 100% on their first attempt, and that improvement and growth is just part of the journey. I think that's a profound lesson that we can embrace, and that helps us become more effective communicators.
I love that. And one of the things I'm hearing you say is being intentional behind the effective communication. Why? What is it? I want to be effective communicator, effective leader. Well, why? Why? What's it gonna? What's gonna allow you to be sustainable over time? What's gonna allow you to be? Because you can do it. I can sit here and be an effective communicator, active listen, ask these questions, and then realize that was exhausting.
Mhm.
But what's going to keep you going? And tomorrow, the next week, next quarter, next year. And so when I think about these skill sets, myself included, just looking at myself in the mirror, is when I challenge myself to learn these different skill sets that I'm just not acclimated with. Like you said, the traditional thinking, the conventional thinking was authoritative, boss, point the finger. I didn't really have a role model that really spoke effective, communicated effectively, did these things, active listened, empathy. And that's one of the things I wanted to kind of segue into is how important is empathy when it comes to effective communication, being empathetic.
Wow. Wow, is there anything that's more important? um,
That's a big pill to swallow. And just full context, my type of personality, Dr. Michael, is that's on the bottom of the barrel for me. For as far, it's a weakness, it's a struggle, it's a flaw. I've shared this in my podcast. It's a struggle of mine. And so I have had to be over intentional about it. So when you say that, I've realized that as a leader, you have to be empathetic. And so, can you elaborate on it? Can you speak to that with
um,
how that shows up as to effective communication?
well, why don't we just frame it as a choice, right? So I mean,
Good
it's a
point.
choice, and you
Yes.
can choose to just ignore what your team feels, what the customers feel, what the investor feels, how they react, and just push through with your message. And there
Yeah.
are a ton of books that teach you how to 10x your effort, how to ramp up, how to close the sale,
Yes.
and all of that stuff, and how to streamline your team.
And
There's a
that's what
lot.
I was raised on. That's what that right there, what you just said, is what I was raised on.
Yeah, and there's still, I mean, to be honest, there's still a lot of businesses who run that way.
Yeah.
But then again, we've got that huge voice of the employees that's raising basically day by day, who have a choice, who don't want to come to the office every day, who have a
Right.
choice of going to that business that's using authority and command and control, or the other business that helps their employees grow, that sees them for who they are, that trusts them with decisions, that listens to what they have to say, even if they just started as a junior. Um, and so more and more people have a choice. It's not like back in the days where we lived at some place and there was that huge company that basically everyone went to work for, and if you got fired there, you were basically out of job. um, it doesn't work that way anymore. You can basically work across the globe at a company that values those things.
Yes.
And I think that that's only growing more in importance, and that we will see more and more employees make that choice. And
Yes.
so I would like to respond to your initial question. It's your choice, but
Yeah.
make it in full sight of that truth.
Oh, man, that's so powerful. And I could not agree with you more. And here's why, because I'm living proof. I've done both. I'm a big believer in there's two roads to travel. There's the road most traveled, which is what you're saying as far as, hey, don't listen to my voice. It's a choice. You can be empathetic or you cannot be empathetic. But good luck. That's the road most traveled. That's old school. Or there's the road less traveled. Hey, look, you know your temperament, you know your personality, you know who you are, you're intentional about that. This is a choice to be empathetic, put yourself in this person's shoes, and choose to active listen. I've done both, Dr. Michael. And let me tell you, this guy over here, this version, the leader that is empathetic or more intentional about it and chooses that path of less traveled, man, that guy, that company, those team members not only get to where they want to go as far as goals, but as a company as well. And I would just encourage anybody listening to this to also rewind that again and make a note of that and be intentional about it. It's a choice. And once you decide, like, this is who I want to become, this is the leader, this is the effective leader that understand it's not about me. Looking at yourself in the mirror, it's like, hey, what's the North Star here? What's the vision? What's the mission? Cool. Who do I need to become in that journey? Empathetic, active listener. These are all effective communication strategies. So, is that what I'm hearing you say?
You nailed
Hit the
it.
nail right on the head. Okay,
You
awesome.
nailed it.
Well, awesome, man. Well, there's a ton of more questions I wanted to ask you, and we're wrapping up on time here. But I wanted to dive deep, spend the next few minutes with you on something else that I just struggled with was preparation. You had mentioned it at the very early stages of the podcast, how important preparation is for effective communication. Can you elaborate on that, on preparation and what that looks like in for business, whether it's you're fixing to be a guest on podcast or you're fixing to have a meeting with your employee? How is that congruent or aligned with the effective communication?
Let me tell you a story about a friend of mine,
Okay.
who was very surprised to learn recently from his colleagues from the board that they considered him a brilliant speaker. Um, because he never looked at himself that way. In fact, he didn't really like the mere thought of standing on a stage. He's much more the guy who likes to stand in the background, doing the work, doing it rigorously, and leaving the spotlight to others.
Yes.
Um, but well, he's a member of the board, so it's part of his job.
Right.
Um, and so we dug a little bit deeper to understand, so where was that mismatch coming from?
Mm.
And I think we found a pretty good explanation for that. And I think it boils down to preparation. It's that he took it seriously. He understood, first of all, I mean, it is part of my job. So I just gotta get my shit together.
Yeah.
But secondly, he understood that standing on that stage at that conference meant that he had a chance to make a difference. And
Mm.
so he took it seriously, just with everything else that he does work on.
Yeah.
So he prepared, and he asked questions like, so how can I make that impact? Why do the people in the audience show up to listen to me? And what do they expect from me? And how can I lead them there? And so that led him to deliver a speech that the audience loved. Unlike some of his colleagues
Mm.
for whom it was almost the opposite, who thought they are rather good at speaking, which might have led them to think that, well, I don't even have to prepare that much because I'm just going to wing
Mm.
it because I'm good at speaking, right?
Yeah.
And so they went out with little preparation and they winged it and blew it, right?
Right.
Um,
Mm.
and so that's one type of people who would benefit more from preparation. The people who think they are natural born speakers and just, well, go out there without thinking much about, so what is expected from me on that day, in that moment, for that audience. um,
Yeah.
and then there's the other type who shies away from preparation out of fear of the event itself. So for whom the thought of standing in front of a crowd is so scary that it transcends to the preparation. And so
Mm.
they try to move it as much forward as possible. So because standing up to prepare means facing that situation,
Mm.
and so they skip it. And the next day, but that what that means is that the next day the thought is only going to be more scary, right? Because it's
Right.
closer to the event.
Yep.
And but because it's so scary, they move it another day. And so they are in that cycle where they get ever closer to the day, and the fear gets bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. Um, when in fact it's the other way around, right? Because it's
Yeah.
the preparation, the safe spot in your office that allows you to take the risk but without the risk, right? To
Yeah.
make the error but without the consequence, to test out all the things that could go wrong so that they don't go wrong when you're live and effectively standing on the stage. And that's how you become good at speaking, and that's why preparation matters. Not because you're not good. I mean, that's the whole point of preparation, but to get you to the point of being brilliant when it matters, to being prepared when it matters,
Hmm.
right?
Yeah. So what I'm hearing you say is there's the leaders out there that are, again, road most traveled, road less traveled. The leaders that are taking the road less traveled, that are preparing, they're spending that time, energy, and effort for the podcast to find out about their guest, to have that meeting with their investor, employee. They're spending some preparation time to prepare for that.
Mhm.
And then there's the road where most leaders, and myself included to a certain degree, where you would just try to wing it. You would try to use your talents. You would try to use your strengths. And that will only get you so far. Right. I
Mhm.
don't think
Exactly.
that thinking and that execution will get you to where you want to go. And so I couldn't agree with you more on the
There,
preparation.
there's a great story from Neil deGrasse Tyson, who's one of those guys who just never is shy of a word, right? He who
Yeah.
just, you can basically throw any question at him, and he always seems to know what to reply, right? And he
Yep.
seems to be an expert on basically everything that you ask him. And so what that leads a lot of people to believe is that he's just naturally talented, that he's
Mm,
just that quick-witted guy that's
yep.
naturally talented. But you couldn't be farther from the truth.
Mm,
Because in
yes.
fact what he himself said in an interview is that whenever he shows up for an interview, he shows up 10x prepared. He
Mm,
has gone through all the obvious questions, all the non-obvious questions, all the stupid questions, and thought about answers to those questions, so that there's a super low chance that any journalist could throw a question at him that he hasn't prepared for.
Wow.
And that's how he appears to be so eloquent and so relaxed, right? To
Yeah.
In order to appear as though you didn't have to prepare, you need to be prepared 10x, right?
So, what I'm hearing you say with the preparation, one of the things that sticks out to me, and I'm sure our listeners may be thinking the same thing, is I've got a busy life. I'm, talking to employees and running a business, marketing, sales, advertising,
Totally,
all this, right?
totally,
Just like all of us. No
totally.
time during the day.
I hear you.
What would be a rule of thumb for preparing for, you said speaking engagement, but a rule of thumb for a 30-minute meeting with an employee or a 60-minute podcast with a guest? Is there a rule of thumb out there for how much time should you prepare for this?
Any time that you can get. I'm you just forced me to frame that as another choice, right? One
Yeah.
of my favorite quotes ever is from a German journalist, Wolf Schneider, who once said that um, someone's got to suffer, either the writer or the reader. Um,
Wow. Yes.
and I think this is just spot on. So
Yeah.
yeah, I hear you. You're totally right. You've got a busy schedule. Your
Yeah.
day couldn't just fit in one more call from your child from your children, right?
Yep.
So
Yep.
you're busy as hell.
Yep.
And yet your employee, your customer, your audience, they don't owe you the hard work of making sense of what you want them to get. If
Mm,
you want them to get what you mean, it's on you. And you've got a choice to make.
yes.
Do I delegate the task of figuring out to my audience? That's fine. You're a busy businessman. I hear you. But if you want them to follow you, to engage with you, to listen to you, you better listen to them first. You better pay attention to them first. And yeah, sometimes that's an incredibly daunting amount of work.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's not. Sometimes that's super quick because you know them, you've worked with them for so long. It's basically 3 minutes of preparation is all it takes. But
Yeah.
man, take those 3 minutes, right?
Mm. Man, that's beautiful. I I've got a ton of notes here, and we could probably talk for the next 3 hours because obviously I'm obsessed with becoming a better effective communicator, and we've run over on time, so that's my fault. And man, we'll wrap things up. And so I just want to acknowledge you for having the courage to come on the podcast, say yes, reach out, and just share insights, tips, and valuable information just for myself, for my listeners, for our audience. And I really appreciate you. We're really grateful for you for taking the time, energy, and effort out of your day to come and share it with our audience. So we really appreciate you. Two final questions, my friend. First question is, how can our listeners and audience support you?
Um, well, I imagine a world in which people who have an important story to tell, right, a story that has the potential to change the world, find the words to make that happen.
Mm,
Um, and if you feel like you have that important story, then do the work and find those words, and then go out there and tell those words. That would make my day. And
mm,
just let me know about that. If you want some support with that, you might want to take a look at my new book, The Path to Strategic Impact. And that would be a great favor that you could do me. Just buy that book, read it, and if you like it, leave a review, and hand it over to other people who would also benefit from that. Spread the word so that more people tell their story and make the impact that they deserve.
Beautiful. We'll also have this in the show notes as well. And like I said, right after this podcast, I'm going to go in there. You probably can't see who ordered it, but I'm excited about ordering it. And that's the thing with Amazon, super streamlined, super easy. So I'm excited to get the book. Second and final question, Dr. Michael, is what does level up and live mean to you?
So I think that for me, that means let me put it that way. So one of my core values is that I try to leave the world a little bit better than I found it, at least in my sphere of influence. And so if I live up to my own advice, parts of the messages that we share today, so that I can listen better to the people around me and help them live a better life and feel like they feel welcomed and they can make a contribution, and they can do probably the same within their sphere of influence, then that will be a great outcome for me.
Man, that's beautiful. Well, you definitely made my day. You've definitely inspired me, and you've definitely made me a better human being just by your insights. So we always end the show with by saying "level up and live." And if you're listening to this, we always say you're welcome, because there's been so much value that's been dropped. Share this with a business owner, entrepreneur that wants to level up in their effective communication. Get the book. It's going to be in the show notes. Let's support this awesome human being. And thanks again, Dr. Michael, for being on the show today. Outside of that, level up and live.
It's been a real pleasure. Thanks.
Absolutely.